We're back with this week's challenge, looking at how we can create the calculations that could help us to create some control charts in Tableau Desktop. So what we've got is a list of how many complaints each department is getting each week and the dates of those complaints. So this is a cool data set. What we're going to do is we're going to work out the mean and the standard deviation for each week so that we can work out those upper and lower control limits and yeah, take it from there. So the first thing that we need to do is work out the mean and standard deviation. Now you could do this with some LODs, but I think in this example it's actually probably nicer to calculate the mean and the standard deviation in an aggregate tool. So in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is I need to duplicate my complaints field so that I can work out both the mean and the standard deviation. That's kind of a little quirk, I guess, of prep that you need to have, that column in there twice if you want to get two different aggregates off of it. So I go into my aggregate step. I'm grouping by my week because I want to work out the mean and standard deviation for each week. And yep, there we go. I'm using both my complaints fields and my duplicate complaints field to create the standard deviation and the mean. Now, this is where my solution definitely differs from Carl's solution. So I was cheeky and I decided to bring in a little scaffold to do the different upper and lower control limits for how many standard deviations you wanted to be from the mean. So I decided to scaffold the data basically. So I brought in a 1, 2, 3 scaffold. I just created that in Excel, saved it as a CSV, brought it into Prep. I know it's not one of the inputs, but you are free to bring in extra inputs if you think they're going to be useful for you in the challenge. And I renamed that just be number of standard deviations so that I know what I'm talking about. And to create that scaffold, I just used the week not being equal to. That's important there. The not equals sign will just mean that we get a row for each 1, 2, 3. As you can see, we go from 5 rows to 15 rows. And that is exactly the type of behavior that I wanted. Because now, rather than doing 9 calculations for, changing it for 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations from the mean, I can just do 3 calculations. And I am lazy. So that's why I chose to scaffold, basically. So for our upper control limit, we are just doing that calculation that Carl showed us. So the mean plus the number of standard deviations field, which will be 1, 2, or 3, times by the standard deviation. So it's the same for the upper and the lower, you're just changing it from plus to minus. And then the variation is just the upper control limit minus the lower control limit. And we have that now for each of our number of standard deviations. We join this back to our original data set so that we bring in that detail about the number of complaints for each week, for each department. And we're joining that on the week, just so you know, because that's what we were grouping by back in our aggregate step. So that's kind of the dimension that we need to join back our data. And now we can just work out our outliers. So the way that we do this is we just say, if our number of complaints, maybe if I zoom in, that would help. If our number of complaints is greater than our upper control limit, or our number of complaints is lower than our control limit, then we label that as being outside. Otherwise, we just give it a null. And then we're going to filter our data to just contain these outliers. So just click on that value, click on keep only, and that filters our data set. Now we just need to do a little bit of filtering for each of our outputs. So this is again where I prefer my method of having scaffolded, because I can just use that number of standard deviations field to just click on that I want the 1 standard deviation from the mean, and I want to keep only those rows, and then I can just get rid of that field so that my output is the same as Carl's. And I repeat that 3 times with 2 standard deviations or 3 standard deviations. And the output, I'm using the Microsoft Excel type here so that I can create different worksheets of 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, and 3 standard deviations. And that's all pretty self-explanatory, I hope. So thanks very much for watching. I hope that you learned something from this challenge, and goodbye.